Welcome to our speaker series. For those of you joining us for the first time, a very special welcome to you. I'm Joel Capejan, Director of CERC, the Center for Enhancing the Research Capacity of Minority-Serving Institutions at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. CERC is funded by the National Institute of Justice, and our mission is to help researchers build the skills, the network, and support they need to develop strong, competitive, and actionable research programs. And we believe that a main driver of that is external funding. And for that reason, this year's speaker series is centered on the grant writing process, from finding funding opportunities to crafting strong research questions, developing competitive proposals, and ultimately planning what comes after the funder's decision. In our last session, Dr. Matthew DeMichel walked us through the process of identifying external funding opportunities in criminal justice. If you were not able to join us, we'll share the link to that recording during today's session. You can also join our mailing list and visit our website to get access to previous recordings and materials from the series, as well as to find out what's coming down the pipe. We have a fantastic session for you today. At this point, I'd like to turn things over to Professor Joshua Freilich, co-director of CERC, Professor of Criminal Justice at John Jay College, and some might say his most important title and role, host of the speaker series. He will be introducing today's speakers to you guys. Josh?
Thank you so much, Dr. Capejan. I just want to reiterate that we're very excited about the center and the speaker series. So today's session is titled Formulating Strong and Impactful Research Questions, and our presenter is our colleague and friend, Dr. Eric Pisa from Northeastern University. Like the first two sessions, we're going to go for 90 minutes today until 1 p.m. Dr. Pisa will present for around 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll have some time for question and answer sessions. Just like the first two sessions, everybody will have an opportunity to submit questions. You can do so via the question box, and our center managers, Justice Evans and Noreen Ali, will organize the questions, and I will then present them to Dr. Pisa. Just a quick reminder, at the conclusion of the talk, everybody is going to have an opportunity to complete a brief post-event survey. It'll just take a couple of minutes. Please complete it. We just want to get feedback so that we can improve future talks and offerings. So today's speaker, as Dr. Capejan noted, is Dr. Eric Pisa. Dr. Pisa is the Lippman Family Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice and the Director of Crime Analysis Initiatives at Northeastern University. His research focuses on spatial analysis of crime patterns, evidence-based policing, crime control technology, and the integration of academic research and police practice. Dr. Pisa has published 70 peer-reviewed journal articles in 3 books, and he's published in some of the leading journals in our field, including Criminology, Criminology and Public Policy, Justice Quarterly, and the Journal of Experimental Criminology, among many others. In support of his research, Dr. Pisa has received over $6.9 million in research funding from local, state, federal, and private foundations, including NIJ, Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Charles Koch Foundation, and the New Jersey Gun Violence Research Center. Before entering academia, Dr. Pisa served as the Geographic Information Systems Specialist of the Newark, New Jersey Police Department, and there he was responsible for crime analysis and program evaluations for the department. Dr. Pisa received his PhD from Rutgers University in 2012, and it's now my pleasure to turn it over to him.
Great, thank you very much, Josh. Let me try to go ahead and share my screen now. There we go. There we go. I'm pretty sure everyone can see my screen, but I feel like it's tradition at this point to ask if everyone can see the screen. So if anyone's having trouble seeing my screen, say so in the chat. Thank you very much for Joel, Josh, and the rest of the CERC team for inviting me today. I've been looking forward to this presentation for quite some time. Thinking about research questions and everything that goes into a good research question is one of my passions, and I really wish I was kidding about that, but I'm not. So this is something that I'm really interested in speaking about. A couple of notes up top, right? One, because this is a grant writing speaker series, I'm focused pretty tightly on the issue of developing research questions in the context of grant applications. So most of what I say applies to that process. However, I do think a lot of what I emphasize here speaks to research questions and conducting research a little bit more generally, but I just wanted to give the caveat that we're pretty focused on grants as well. Okay, so I never want to be the only person, well, I'm the only person speaking, right? But I never want to be speaking at everyone for the entire time. So I'm hoping we can get a little bit of engagement here. If you could, for a second, pull out your cellular communication devices, scan that QR code, or if you wanted to go old school and just answer the question right on your computer, you could hit the URL in the lower right-hand area of the screen. And given today's topic, I was just curious, when you hear the phrase research question, what do you think of, right? So what exactly does that phrase mean to you? Okay. While we wait for everyone to participate, I am going to mute myself and take a sip of water. Let me give you this once again, just in case everyone needs another minute. All right, so I had there we go. Okay, good. I was going to pretend to respond to words on the screen, but thank you all for actually responding and giving me something to engage with. Narrow, very good. Specific, investigation or inquiry, that's really good. So that's essentially what it's all about. Using science, very good, right? So these are all very important components of research questions. Actually, these are so good, right? Maybe we just stop now. You guys have a handle on this. I'm obviously kidding. So these are all really good, and we'll go into more specifics about what is the formal definition of research questions when we go into what makes a research question strong or not. We'll dive into that into much more detail, but you all have already hit on a number of the themes here. So before I kind of dive into the content, just a little kind of roadmap, for lack of a better term. I'm going to spend about the first half of my talk focusing on the type of content that I typically cover in research methods classes or PhD student seminars around research methodology and pursuing research questions. And then the second half of my presentation is going to be focused on how I have personally applied some of those lessons to develop some of my own research questions and successfully secure a couple of funding grants. Now, before we start that, though, like any good academic, I want to make sure that I cited my sources accurately and gave credit where credit is due. So the first half of my presentation, as I mentioned, really draws upon my course material and a lot of my course material and basically how I even think about research and this question of going from topics to question was really impacted by two things. To the left of the screen, we have a textbook, seminal textbook by Wayne Booth and colleagues, The Craft of Research, which is a fantastic primer on how to go about thinking scientifically. Anyone interested in learning more about anything I speak about today, I highly recommend that you get your hands on this book moving forward. Lots of really good stuff in there. I was introduced to this book by the man on the right of my screen, Ron Clark. Ron Clark, he taught the Foundations of Scholarship class that I took as a graduate student at Rutgers University. And that class was fantastic. In that class, Ron really taught his students how to think critically and creatively about every single step of the research process. We tend to use the word research as a singular word, right? I'm doing research, but there's a whole number of steps that you have to do, and there's a whole number of steps that you have to do well in order to perform research at a high level. And Ron's class really taught me how to do that. Almost 20 years later, I'm still applying lessons from that class in my work. So I wanted to just up top give credit where credit is due. You can't understand research questions, I think, without first understanding the landscape that they exist within. Therefore, my talk is going to revolve around three interrelated concepts: research topics, research problems, and research questions. We start with research topics. Research topics are represented by the yellow area on my screen, and they're kind of the all-encompassing upper organizing principle of research. However, we have to be mindful of the fact that a defining feature of research topics is that they can't actually be researched. What do I mean by that? A research topic, by definition, is broad and it speaks to an entire field. It's frankly not possible to do research on that level most of the time. For example, I'm a policing researcher. I can't do a research project on policing. It would take me the rest of my natural life to get through that. That's way too broad. And I like to start here because this is the first kind of roadblock that I have in conversations with all of my students, undergraduate, graduate, who are pursuing original research for the first time. When I ask them what they're interested in study, I get questions like policing or prisons or community corrections or racial inequality. A whole bunch of topics that, again, are super broad and really can't be researched in their entirety. In order to do a solid research project, you have to first focus on something a little bit more tightly to pursue. A very effective way to go about focusing your attention is to identify the pertinent research problems that are inherent in your research topic. Research problems are an issue or knowledge gap that needs further investigation. Every single research topic has a number of research problems. As we'll discuss in a little bit, ironically, the more research that's done on a topic, the more research problems emerge. So there's always something for you to focus on and latch onto when you're trying to go from research topics to questions. Research questions are the final component of science. Research questions are focused and answerable. Research questions guide the entirety of your research study. In many ways, your methodology and your analysis are directly shaped by the nature and the strength of the research question that you develop. So let's kind of speak through what this topic looks like in practice. And I have to rearrange some Zoom windows so I can see my little table over here. So we're all interested in topics, and I thought of three topics when putting this presentation together. I'm a policing researcher, so that's obviously the first topic that I'm interested in. I'm also a sports fan, for better or worse, so that's also another topic that I'm interested in. And I just thought of nutrition because, to be honest, that was one of the topics in the Booth and colleagues book. Again, we can't do research on policing, sports, and nutrition. We need to get more focused. A restricted topic within policing is the notion of police technology. A restricted topic in sports is sports and mental health. Nutrition is different kinds of diets and nutritional benefits. So now we're getting there, right? Now we're moving from a large, very broad, very rich and diverse knowledge area, and we're starting to move to something that can be looked at a little bit more directly. We go from restricted topics to narrow topics. A type of police technology is body-worn cameras. An issue in sports and mental health is the mental health of people who have the misfortune of rooting for New York City-based football franchises. So once we understand a narrow topic, then we could kick around ideas and start to think critically about what is it about that narrow topic that we want to learn more about. And that's where we get to research questions. So a research question that can be pursued in the context of policing is, do body-worn cameras impact police behavior in the field? That is a question that lends itself to measurement. That is a question that can provide the foundation of a research project. Kind of tongue-in-cheek, but still, if you wanted to put effort into exploring this, you could. A research question around sports and mental health is, what impact does rooting for a professional New York football team have on the mental health of fans, and particularly the mental health of fans over the past 10 years when the New York Giants and Jets have been absolute rubbish? So these are examples of the process of going through a broad topic, really thinking critically about what is it about that topic that you understand or want to understand a little bit more, and then developing a solid or concrete research question to guide your efforts. So I've used the word solid, good, impactful, I think is in the title of this talk. So let's talk through a little bit what makes a research question good, right? I've said a number of times already that a good research question, a solid research question is a goal. So how do you know if you got there? The advice I give is to assess your research question based upon 4 different criteria. The first is you want a research question that is clear and empirical. If your research question is difficult to understand, it needs more refining. One piece of advice I always give my students in the context of writing is read your paper out loud to yourself. If something sounds funky and weird, it's probably funky and weird. Same thing with the research questions. When you've developed the research questions, or maybe you've developed multiple research questions that you're considering, sit with it, say it out loud, hear how it sounds, and essentially make an assessment of whether or not it is sufficiently clear. You also need to be precise. What role do body cameras play in policing is a little bit too broad. Technically speaking, that's a research question, but it's not as narrow, it's not as focused as we would like it to be. What impact do body cameras have on civilian complaints against officers? That's much more precise. That's speaking about different variables. It lets you identify a potential cause and effect. And that clearly articulates and provides a foundation for larger research efforts. Your research question in that way should speak to some kind of scientific relationship. If you're only interested or focused on creating frequencies or documenting the occurrence of events, then you may be limiting the impact of your research question. Now, there are exceptions to this. I work in the area of policing. I'm a criminal justice professor. So, unfortunately, the way we manage and collect criminal justice data on a national level leaves quite a bit to be desired. We don't have any good measures of things like mass shootings and police-involved shootings, for example. So if you're studying something that's so rare and so undocumented as that, then perhaps you could rest on a research question that is only concerned about finding ways to count those events. However, if you're studying things that particularly have been studied previously in the context of grants, if you're trying to get a funder's attention, speaking to some type of scientific relationship will help your research question stand apart. The second criteria is original. I've used the body-worn effect on citizen complaints example multiple times already. But if we're analyzing that research question through this prism, that ranks a little low on the originality scale. People have looked into that question quite a bit. There's been so much research on that exact question that we have multiple systematic reviews that look into research that has, again, developed that type of research question. So improving the originality of that research question would involve something like looking at body-worn cameras' impact on something else, perhaps prosecutions, perhaps officer decision-making, perhaps fear of crime. Those are aspects of body cameras that have not been as well researched as this question of citizen complaints against police officers. Again, as a reminder, I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong in pursuing that exact research question or a research question that others have pursued. More science is always better than less science, so there's nothing wrong with replication. Quite the opposite. I think replication is a good idea. But if we're having an honest conversation about developing research questions for grant applications, in my experience, an original research question is always going to get funder attention a little bit more than a research question that has been around the block a few times, for lack of a better term. The third criteria is feasibility. All of us are bad at this, naturally. We get ideas in our head. We go through the process of, we have a broad interest in a topic. We narrow it down. We develop a really nice research question that we're proud of. And then we kind of forget, I still haven't learned this lesson myself, and I'm almost 20 years into this profession. We forget that there's work that goes along with it. All research studies are time constrained. Funded research studies are incredibly time constrained. You're awarded money from a funder. That work has to be done within the specified time period. You could get yourself in trouble if you develop a research question that is so complex that it's just not possible to get all of the work done in the amount of time that you promised the funder that it'll get done. There's also the opposite problem. Research questions suggest specific methodologies that take a certain amount of time. If your research question is a little underdeveloped and doesn't lend itself to enough work, funders may be curious why you say in your application that you need so much time to complete the study that the research question is supporting. So you have to think critically about exactly what does this research entail, exactly what does this research question promise to the funders that I'm asking for funding from. You have to make sure that the research question aligns with the study setting link that you have in mind. The last question I have, or last criteria rather, for research questions has to do with relevance. I like to explain relevance to my students in the terms of so what. So I call this the so what principle for shorthand. Why should anyone care about your research question? If you're a grant reviewer, or if you're an employee at a funding agency, and you're sifting through dozens of applications, why should they care, or why should you care about a specific research question that comes across your desk? And this, I think, is where the role of identifying research problems becomes critically important. I think highlighting a problem and speaking to how your research question solves that problem goes a long way towards developing competitive grant applications. So let's pause here and talk about problems a little bit. The word problem has a very specific, very special meaning in research. And it means something a little bit different than what it means in everyday life. In everyday life, we think of problems as inconveniences, things to avoid. No one likes to have problems. In academic research, conversely, problems are things that we should be actively seeking out. Without research problems, we may not have anything to research in the first place, or going back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, we may not be communicating the urgency and importance of our research question enough. So because of that, I wanted to distinguish between practical problems and research problems. I'll give you an example practical problem. Prior to coming to Northeastern, I worked at John Jay College of Criminal Justice for 9 years. I would travel into Manhattan from the great state of New Jersey. That meant I had to rely on New Jersey Transit pretty often. Any of you who also have to rely on New Jersey Transit pretty often know where I'm heading with this, and I'm in solidarity with you. I'm sorry you have to still deal with that. But anyway, a practical problem I faced often was New Jersey Transit is bad, right? That's a technical term, very bad. Very unreliable, trains would not come. They would announce train cancellations 10 minutes after the train was supposed to leave. That was a practical problem for me. Because of that practical problem, there was a cost that I had to bear on a fairly frequent basis. Some days, the cost was me taking 2 to 3 times longer to get either into work or to get home after work than New Jersey Transit's schedule suggested that it should. That cost has real consequences. The consequence of me taking so long to get to or from work meant things like morning meetings that I would have at John Jay, occasionally having to be moved or rescheduled or, every now and then missed because of the problem incurred by New Jersey Transit. So those are examples of practical problems. As researchers, we're not concerned with practical problems. And I want to explain that a little bit because I've made a career out of doing what I refer to as applied research. The research I do, I like to think, is directly connected to real-world issues in the criminal justice and policing spaces. I'm assuming that a lot of people on this call feel the same about their work. Even if that's the case, even though as researchers, our primary concern are not practical problems. Our primary concern are research problems. Even if we hope those research problems can help practitioners figure out what to do about practical problems. So let's think about New Jersey Transit in the context of research problems rather than practical problems. So what's the research problem inherent in this New Jersey Transit issue? We could talk about why is it so difficult to get to New York from the city that I lived in New Jersey. So essentially, what is it about the spatial distribution of public transit infrastructure, of public transit investments, that makes it more difficult for some people to get to work than others? It's a practical problem, right? We don't understand the relationship between neighborhoods, the relationship between geography, and different performing public transit systems. What's the cost of not knowing this? From a research perspective, the cost of not knowing this is we have no way of predicting in certain neighborhoods what would be the effect if we invested a little bit more public transportation resources into that area. If we don't understand the relationships between poor public transit and good public transit, spatially speaking, we have trouble predicting which one of these factors can we maybe change to make some people's lives a little bit easier. There's a consequence in that, right? The consequence in that is we don't know how to do things like applied experiments. We don't know what other research that we may be able to do to help shine light on this problem. Again, the hope is that by addressing this research problem, we could eventually impact the practical problem. But again, our first motivation, our first job as researchers is identifying and addressing these research problems. So how do we find research problems? At top, I kind of cited my 2 sources. There are other things that I read in preparation for today. One of them was this really great article by Vanderbroek and Pierce. published in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology in 2018. So essentially, they gave young researchers 3 pieces of advice for identifying different types of research problems that can inform the development of impactful research questions. 1, build on your experience. One question I get from a lot of early career students is how do they get quote unquote good at doing research? Or another common question is how do they get good at writing? Everyone hates the answer I give them, but it's the correct answer. You get good at doing research by doing research. You get good at writing by writing. In other words, there's no substitution for actually going through the process. Look at that as an opportunity. We all have experiences conducting projects. We all have started research projects. We've all published, maybe to a certain degree, but everyone here, if they haven't been in the publication process yet, that's something they're aspiring to. All of those experiences can help inform how you engage with the wider body of knowledge. As you begin a new research project, think critically about the last one. What did you learn? Did anything surprise you about what you learned? Were there any unexpected challenges that you had to navigate? If you could go into a time machine and go back to when you conducted that older project, are there things you would have done differently? That will alert you to the types of issues that you need to figure out as a researcher to do a stronger research project the next time. The second piece of advice Vanderbroek and Pierce have is be alert to new ideas. Whether personal or vicarious, your prior research experiences prepare you to actively search for problems when you engage in the larger literature. One piece of advice I always have is search for problems as you read. We all have to do literature reviews. We all engage and read research we're interested in and maybe related to what we want to do ourselves. So don't just read articles for the purpose of reading articles. Read articles actively and seek out problems highlighted by this research that you may want to tackle in your own. So an analogy that Vanderbroek and Pierce put together, I thought was really, really interesting. They called it the wristwatch metaphor. And they said, when you're searching the literature, do not act like a beachcomber. In 2026, I'm not sure how much the concept of a beachcomber makes sense, but whatever, I'm leaning into it. So a beachcomber grabs the magnetic thing, that's a technical term, that this gentleman's holding in his left hand, and they're searching for precious metals that may be buried in the sand. A beachcomber looks everywhere. A beachcomber tries to search as much of the sand as possible for their, I guess, buried treasure. Don't do research like that. Do not engage with other people's scholarship like that. Instead, act like someone who's lost their watch. So if you're on the beach and you lose your watch, you probably know a few different things. One, you'll know what parts of the beach you were at and which ones you weren't. You'll also know exactly what your watch looks like. So that means you don't have to search the entire beach. That means you could be selective and search the places you think are the most likely locations for your lost watch. And when you find your watch, you'll know it's yours because you knew exactly what you were looking for. Sounds simplistic, but I think we've all been in a situation where we're starting a new research project, perhaps a research project on a new topic, and we're trying to read as much as possible. And in reading as much as possible, we become inundated, we drown, because in every single scientific discipline, there's too much to comprehend. Maybe I shouldn't say that as a college professor, but there's a lot out there, right? There's too much for you to know sufficiently well to research all of it. So what you're trying to do is just identify the most relevant literature. Going back to my body camera example. You're interested in body cameras, but you're interested in a very specific use and potential benefit of body cameras. That means that you may not have to read 100% of the body camera research out there. That means that there may be a subset that informs your thinking. Another thing this means is when you are engaging with research, you could read it critically. I've been here before, right? And a number of my undergraduate students do this. You may print out an article or maybe use some kind of electronic reader. You're going through and you're trying to actively read and you're highlighting everything. And then you take a step back and the entire page is yellow or whatever color highlighter you're using. And then you realize you're actually trying to absorb everything. That's not how you want to read. That's not how you want to engage with research. You want to be selective and you're looking for stuff that, again, highlights the research problems that you want to solve. So this isn't a cyclical process, right? This isn't cyclical, but essentially this is how you can operate as an applied researcher and how you could go about developing strong research questions that ultimately support grant applications, but also helps you maintain an active research agenda. We're all motivated by practical problems, right? I'm assuming everyone here is a social scientist. So social science, by its definition, is concerned with real world issues. So that motivates all of us. But we go from practical problems to research questions. The research questions define a research problem. And after we answer the question, we're hoping that it impacts the practical problem. This isn't a linear process, right? I wanted to highlight that you could jump around this a little bit. Sometimes, as I said before, a practical problem may directly lead to the identification of a research problem and vice versa. Sometimes when you answer a research problem or answer a research question, you don't necessarily go on to the next practical problem. You may develop a second research question to further understand the problem that you focused on. Okay, let me skip ahead. So that kind of is the that's the transition point between kind of the textbook context that I was talking about. I know a lot of these concepts are a little bit abstract, so I wanted to close the presentation here with a discussion of how I have applied some of these concepts to my own work. And I'm a policing researcher. I'm making the assumption that everyone here is a social scientist. I'm not assuming everyone is a policing researcher. So what I ask you to do is when I use the phrase policing, or if I'm talking about a policing topic, just swap that out for whatever you're interested in understanding better. A good starting point, however, is thinking about dragons. I think dragons are an important starting point for all researchers when they're considering developing new projects, developing new ideas. What the hell am I talking about? Great question. Okay. So we're looking at snapshots here of the Hunt-Lennox globe. Historians believe this is the oldest globe in the world and one of the first globes to show the Americas clearly depicted. It's become a little bit famous for the phrase "Hinc sunt dracones." I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. In English, that translates to "Here be dragons." Across a number of areas around Asia, this globe has the "Here be dragons" inscription on it. Why? There's been sources of debate about exactly why, but the most common agreed upon reason is that the globe makers in 1508 hadn't been to Asia yet. They weren't sure what was out there. So they just wanted to give you the heads up that if you go out there, there may be dragons. Medieval cartographers would carry on this tradition. This is an actual scan from a medieval map contained in the New York Public Library. The words "Here be dragons" are not on here, but there are some really badass looking mythical creatures that are going to town on that boat, right? That ship is having a really rough time. again, medieval map makers are acknowledging that there's something about that part of the world that they don't know about. They cannot in good conscience tell you anything about that part of the world. So it's a simple message. We haven't been there before. We don't know anything about it. If you're going to go over there, know that you're entering an environment that no one knows much about. That's how I think we all should approach our research questions. This is how, when we undertake a new research project, we should start thinking. What is out there that we know? More importantly, what is out there that we do not know? Or maybe we don't know well enough. I think that's a good starting point for anyone identifying or trying to identify research problems for the purpose of developing research questions, for the purpose of seeking outside funding to explore those research questions. So as I said, all sciences have dragons. It doesn't matter if you're a policing researcher, corrections researcher, a traditional sociologist, biologist, dragons are out there. And in 2026, the paradox is that the more science we generate, the more research knowledge we put out into the world, the more dragons over time may actually appear. The basis for that statement is this study by Benjamin Jones. Excuse me, I had to mute my mic so I could cough real quick. So the study by Benjamin Jones that looked at the nature of patents and Nobel Prize winners over the last, I believe they looked at a century or so. And essentially, what Jones found was, as time went on, patents and Nobel Prizes were awarded to research studies that were increasingly more technically sophisticated and also involved a higher number of co-principal investigators and co-authors than we saw decades earlier. So the argument that they make is that as we know more, making true contributions to science becomes more difficult. A study that was considered innovative 25, 30, 35 years ago may not be considered as innovative if it was published today, because we know that already. I spoke about body-worn cameras. I said that the research question, do body-worn cameras impact citizen complaints? That's kind of tried and true at that point. That wasn't true 15 years ago. The first couple of studies to explore that research question were incredibly and truly groundbreaking. Today, not so much. And I think a great analogy to think about in this context of science getting harder, and to use the phrase used by Jones, the burden of knowledge, is thinking about picking fruit. If you have a tree and you want to pick fruit from the tree, getting the lowest hanging fruit is obviously what you're going to do first. You're going to get all of that. You're going to fill up your baskets like these fine AI people have done. And you've done a good job of harvesting your tree. If you want more fruit, you're going to have to put in more effort. You're going to have to climb that tree. You're going to have to get a ladder. I'm not sure what the tool's called, but I have like this long orange thing with like a little mini chainsaw at the end that I use to trim my trees. You'll need one of those. So essentially, it becomes more difficult and you need to exert more effort in order to get more fruit. What does that mean for research? Now, if I think about my field of policing, we know a lot. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that we probably know more about police than any other government institution. We have 60 years of pretty solid police research at our fingertips. Because of that, we know some stuff about policing. We know that, for example, police are more effective when they're proactive, not reactive, when they focus on geography rather than just focusing on people, when they tailor their actions to identifiable problems, and when they do not overly rely on arrest and other law enforcement actions. But if we take an honest look at the body of policing research, and we go through this process of critically analyzing the research that we engage with, we'll also see a lot of dragons. There's a lot of things we don't know very well in policing. We know strategies work. Problem-oriented policing as a strategy works, for example. We have a lot less understanding of what individual cops on the street delivering those strategies should be doing. So we don't know much about tactics. We don't know much about how police officers go about managing competing priorities while they're on the street. Policing is, and I would argue always will be, a very low supervision environment. Therefore, we have very little understanding of how police act, especially when they're engaging with citizens at the street level. We also don't know enough about the citizen side of this. Problem-oriented policing works. Hotspots policing works. We do not know, for the large part, whether or not citizens know that. We don't know about citizen experiences, or we don't know enough, rather, about citizen experiences being subjected to those types of strategies. And we really don't have a great handle on how well police practices and priorities of police agencies actually align with the public safety desires and the public safety priorities of citizens. So knowing all of that, I took a critical look at kind of the current state of policing, critical look at work that I've done in the past, stuff I've learned, I've contributed to that body of literature. And there are some things that I wish I could have said that I didn't have the ability to. And I determined that a lot of gaps in policing research are due to data limitations that are inherent in police data systems. A lot of what we care about, and I think the research problems I highlighted on the prior slide are examples of things everyone cares about, can't be measured easily. That's a problem. So I thought maybe there's a way to use technology to help shine light on this issue and to start solving some of these research problems. So the video to the left is an animation of automated vehicle locators in Manchester, New Hampshire. An AVL is essentially just a GPS tracker that's installed on a police vehicle. It lets you know at 15-second intervals exactly where that police vehicle is. It also tells you things such as, is the car standing still or in motion? Are they responding to a call for service, or is it discretionary time? So there's a lot of information. So just looking at this video, which shows one car during one tour of duty in one patrol sector, we learn a little bit about the spatial distribution of patrol. Some areas of Manchester seem like they're getting plenty of police presence. Other areas here are getting virtually no police presence. So I thought maybe this is a technology that could help us learn more. To the right is a body-worn camera video that I pulled from YouTube. I don't have permission to go around showing people body camera videos of the agencies I work with. But body camera videos, again, I thought opened up a wealth of opportunity for us to understand policing problems better. So this is an incident that ended in an arrest and use of force. And if you look in traditional police databases, that's all you'll learn about it. If you watch the video, however, you'll see, and I'll pause it here. We don't need to see this guy get slammed. If you watch the video in its entirety, you'll learn a lot about the escalating incidents, right? Or the escalating factors, rather, that probably led to that incident. There's a lot of bystanders. I'll play this a little bit more, right? This person's mom responded on scene and is trying to speak and engage with the police officers. So there was a lot of on-scene tension that maybe escalated this situation to the point of force. So those are high-tech examples. of how I thought we could go about learning a little bit more about policing problems and research problems in policing. I also thought of a pretty low-tech solution, specifically junk mail. So how is junk mail a research tool? So we've all gotten things like pizzeria menus, Chinese food menus. Anderson Windows loves sending me stuff, right? So we've all gotten advertisements in the mail that we didn't ask for. That is delivered to us by the USPS using their every door direct mail service. So essentially, this lets advertisers target individual households with their materials. I thought this was an interesting way to overcome challenges inherent in asking people about their experiences with the police. Surveys of residents are normally done at large scales, right? Telephone surveys, text message surveys, geofencing surveys that you get like if you're scrolling social media. Those are normally focused on large areas, either like entire cities or entire zip codes. This rather lets you target individual households in individual neighborhoods. So I thought maybe there's a way to use this to shed light on the problem of how are people experiencing policing. So that led to 2 successful NIJ applications that focused directly on these data sources and directly on these research problems. I'm pretty much at time, so I won't go through the trouble of reading the individual research questions. But the first project was in partnership with the Manchester, New Hampshire Police Department and the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. And we're using the AVL data and the body-worn camera video to understand more about various aspects of how do police go about delivering patrol, the temporal aspects of that, the challenges police officers face while on patrol. And we're using the body camera video to understand a little bit more about things like citizen interactions, de-escalation, problem solving, things that we don't think could be analyzed using traditional data sources. The second study, funded by NIJ, is in partnership with the Wauwatosa, Wisconsin Police Department. First things first, Wauwatosa, super fun to say, happy to be in business with them. But we're using AVL data and the USPS Every Door Direct Mail platform to learn a little bit something about how people are experiencing directed policing experiences, or rather directed policing strategies in Wauwatosa. We're using the AVL data to do things like measure how often officers are in the target areas they're supposed to be. We have a meeting about this later today, but we're also interested in the question of how often are officers not where they're supposed to be? How often do they stray away from maybe where their efforts should be focused? We're using the mailing to understand a little bit more about citizen priorities, citizen perceptions and experiences. And the hope is that we'll learn enough by exploring these research questions and solving these research problems to make a real difference in the practical problems that the Wauwatosa Police Department is responsible for solving in the future. So that's that. Went a few minutes over. I apologize to everyone. Here are some of the references that I've cited. If anyone wants to reach out, I'm pretty easy to find, and I enjoy being found. If you have any questions, I'm happy to speak more, happy to provide a copy of my presentation. I gave a URL right there to an open access version of that Weird Dragon article that I wrote, if anyone's interested in that. And also on my personal website, there's open access versions of everything I write. So if you're interested in learning about some of my research, but you don't have subscription access, there'll be a free version for you on my website. And with that, I'll shut up and I'll pause for any questions. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Eric, for the talk. It really was excellent. We do have some time for questions and answers. If you haven't put your question in, you still have a couple of minutes to do so in the box. But before we do Q&A, I just want to quickly turn things over to Joel for a couple of minutes, who has an announcement or two for us.
Thank you, Josh. Yes, before we move on, let me make one quick plug. So alongside this speaker series, we've also launched the Proposal Development Playbook, which is a set of recorded companion pieces designed to supplement these talks. The idea is straightforward. The live sessions are going to give you the big picture roadmap of writing a grant proposal, while the playbook gives you the practical tools, templates, and workflows you can use right away as you start building your proposal. We have intentionally scheduled these modules or place these modules between the live sessions to kind of help you maintain momentum from session to session. So session 1 and 2 of the playbook are now available on our YouTube channel. The first module covers the early stages of proposal development with special attention to the administrative groundwork that needs to be in place before submitting a grant proposal. The second one walks us through the proposal submission tracking, including the mechanics of using the major federal funding portals such as grant.gov, research.gov, and Just Grants for U.S. Department of Justice. And so I hope you guys take a moment and watch those. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Dr. Kapajan. So again, we have some time for questions, and we do have a number. So Dr. Pisa, the first question asks, how do research questions differ for grant proposals as compared to scholarly articles?
Really good question. So let me get back to my relevant slide. So I think for journal articles, you could be a little looser with a couple of these criteria. Again, like there's nothing wrong with replication. If this wasn't a grant specific presentation, I probably wouldn't have spoken about originality for so long. So that's one thing. Like, so research questions are similar for both endeavors. How you assess whether or not your research question is sufficiently strong, I think that's the difference between a grant proposal and a journal article. Again, like the originality bar is probably going to be lower if your intention is to only get a journal article published than if your intention is to get funding to support a research project.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think another thing that might apply in some contexts is that if you're going for a particular funder, right, and you mentioned this before as well, right, you do want to have that connection between your topic and the funder. Whereas for an article, in some cases, there's so many journals out there that you're probably going to be able to find a home for it, an audience. So that might be another one as well. We do have additional questions. So the second question Dr. Pisa asks, what is the role of research sub-questions? And when should we add or use sub-questions in our proposal?
Really good question. So sub-questions could be effective if you're exploring various different aspects of a research question. So I'm hitting body cameras pretty hard today, right? But if you have sub-questions, then a question of what is the impact of body cameras on police-citizen interactions? That's a little vague. That was the answer I gave before. But if you have sub-questions, that kind of makes the vagueness okay, right? Because your sub-questions could then go into defining exactly what you mean by police-citizen interactions, right? So a sub-question could be, what is the impact on procedural justice? Or what is the impact on escalation? What is the impact on citizen complaints? So that's kind of how using sub-questions could be useful, especially in the context of grant applications. It could, show the funder that you're thinking about how to come at this one issue of a variety of different ways analytically.
Great stuff. So the third question that came in asks that you mentioned there is a relationship between a research question, research problem, and methods. I guess the questioner is asking for how the process looked for you. What would come first, second, and third, and if it's an iterative process, and whether there's any sort of moving back and forth along those different dimensions.
Good question. I thought I had a hidden slide for this. I'm having trouble finding my hidden slides, so I'm sorry. So I'll go to another hidden slide that's not directly related to this question, but I hid it for the question and answer, so I'm showing it. So kind of in the context of my research that I ended the presentation talking about, like understanding the research problems is what led me to the data source. Because in reading research and engaging with research, reviewing journal articles, doing all of the things that researchers do, I kept coming to this question of like, if this is such a big problem, why has no one addressed it, right? Like, why is this problem still here? And that is what led me to kind of this issue of data sources, and that directly informed how I wanted to go about measuring and operationalizing all of the different variables that I had to work with in order to explore that research question. And kind of this process here, this relates to data a little bit too, so I guess this slide isn't as irrelevant as I alluded to, but by the time you design your research project, you should be able to answer this type of question, or rather, you should be able to state your research project in this sentence, right? You should explain what you're studying, that's your topic, why you're studying it, that's your research question, what you're hoping that the reader takes away from it, that's the significance, and ultimately what problem you want to solve, that is the relevance. And again, like in how you go about measuring or studying some of these concepts or like the variables you use and the data you use to actually operationalize these concepts fits into this framework as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I just want to turn it over to Dr. Kapajan and see if he has any comments or responses, to this question or even the first couple of ones as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the first, I mean, these are all really good questions. I think that for, how the research questions differ for grant proposals versus scholarly articles. I think that, the main difference is that in some ways, the one for grant proposals is easier because usually the RFP, the funding opportunity, defines the problem for you. So they already narrow it down, and this will depend on who the funder is and the area that they're targeting and what they want to do. But sometimes they really, really narrow it for you, and the steps you have to take from going to the problem to the research questions is much more shorter. So I think that usually is very helpful. Also, this kind of ties a little bit with the second question, which is, kind of like the role of sub-questions. I think there's also a difference between research questions for a scholarly article versus a grant proposal. I find, at least myself, writing sub-questions for grant proposals because essentially it's all tied to the problem, my research problem. And my research problem, in program proposals, I tend to make them multidimensional. So there tends to be kind of like a descriptive problem. So that's my descriptive research question. And then I kind of move into a more correlational or causal research, which kind of sets the second phase of the study in a way. So I think that, because the scope of externally funded research tends to be a little bit bigger than scholarly articles, I think that's where you probably want to use sub-questions. Yeah, that'll be my 2 cents.
I think that's right. Great stuff, Dr. Kapajan. So just a couple of more questions, Dr. Pisa. We have an additional question from a PhD student. And the student writes that as they learn more about their field, it seems like everything could be a research problem. Does the process of creating a good research question differ for folks that are maybe newish to the field compared to those who are more established?
So let me first say that yes, there are a ton of problems. That's a defining feature of science. Which when you're first starting out, when you're a younger researcher, that could feel overwhelming. I think an important research skill to learn is to how to start looking at the plethora of problems as an actual opportunity for you. So since there are so many research problems, that means that there's a lot of different opportunities for you to develop impactful research questions and to justify why your individual study is needed. I don't necessarily think there's a difference between senior researchers and junior researchers engaging in that process, or a difference in terms of the need or importance for it. I do think it's like anything else, a learned skill, right? And I think the more you do research, the more training you receive, the more you engage in your relevant literature, I think that's when you'll start to understand how to use research problems as opportunities rather than feeling burdened by them.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned, Eric, your students struggling with it. When I've taught methods, that's probably the hardest task for my students is going from that general research problem to the more specific question, right? And it's definitely a journey, and each student is just kind of different how they get there. But I think you're right. I think that I've always tried to tell them, the more you read, getting into the prior literature, and that gap becomes, clearer to you. That's where those research questions become easier to identify, I think.
Right.
Dr. Papajan, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, but like Eric mentioned, when you're reading the literature, it's not just about understanding the kinds of questions that people have asked and what they have found, but also it's understanding the methods that have been used, the theory that has been used. You have to have kind of that. Kind of like a little bit, I tend to think of it as like the blueprint that they use to answer the research question. So you're trying to understand both things because some questions, are just going to necessitate different methods, and that can be the contribution. That can be what you do. So it's a matter of just reading the literature, not just for understanding of the findings and relationships, but also for understanding how people have been answering that question. That can be very helpful.
Yeah, and just to build off on that point, sometimes the originality of your research question comes from the methods that you're going to use. So in the police citizen interaction portion of this project that we're working on with Kansas City, what influences police officer use of procedural justice? That's a common question that's been explored. We argued, and I think since we got the grant, it's safe to say successfully argued, that by answering that question by analyzing the body camera video, we had a level of insight that most, if not all, of the prior research that has asked that question lacked. So that's why it's important to think of your research question kind of like as the foundation of everything, right? Because on its own, without knowing the detail of the methodology, that research question maybe, won't catch anyone's attention. But once you couple it with the methodology and analytical plan, that's when I think that for us rose to the level of being competitive in a grant application.
Right. I think that one thing where the process looks a little bit different for PhD students or early career people is that as Dr. Pisa mentioned, the research question is tied to the methods, right? and what the research process as well. So if you're newish to the field, if you're a PhD student, you probably don't have relationships with agencies that are just going to open their doors and give you access to the data. You're probably not a stats whiz that can just learn a new method and just implement it correctly. And so I think that's kind of like a little bit of a limiting factor, but that shouldn't deter you from, crafting questions that are impactful, but that still, like Dr. Pisa mentioned, feasible, right? It's feasible for you to do it. Or this could also be an opportunity for you to make a friend and a research collaborator that can supplement the things that you lack, right? I think that's where those collaborations also matter a lot.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, Joel. And let me just say a bit about research collaborations and research collaborators. That's a skill too, right? So, I mean, if anyone was able to wake up, roll out of bed, and get highly sensitive data from criminal justice agencies, right, we wouldn't have any of these research problems. So knowing how to make contact, knowing how to cultivate relationships with sources of data that you may need, that also is not something that happens overnight, right? So you become good at research by doing research, you become good at writing by writing, and I think you become good at collaborating by trying and putting in effort to establish these types of relationships. So don't feel discouraged if you're early in your career and you haven't been able to figure out how to do that yet. That's a acquired skill.
Great input from both Dr. Pisa and Dr. Kapajan. Listening to you both, it occurred to me, another avenue for research questions, and it probably applies more to, I guess, research articles, but it could conceivably be for grants as well, is that you do have review pieces, whether it's an annual review or aggression and violent behavior in our field, where you literally, the whole article is just literally a review. And invariably, the last section of the article is setting forth open gaps in the field, basically unanswered research questions that really need to be answered to kind of move the field forward, right? So in that sense, especially for a more junior person or even a student, and I always tell my students in the advanced methods class, that's a really good way if you're struggling, like you kind of know the area, but you haven't really narrowed it down yet. That's a really good, strategy just to try and find those review pieces. Sometimes, one of those unanswered questions is literally what you want, was your passion, and then you have a great match over there.
Yeah,
So
100%. I'm sorry, Josh, I didn't mean to cut you off. So just to build up on that, yeah. So I hope that my talk also illustrated becoming a good generator or producer of research forces you to also be a good consumer of research. So going to Josh's point, right, identifying the review articles, understanding what's in your field. What I do, and I've been doing this ever since I was an assistant professor, I subscribe to journal table of contents alerts from as many journals relevant to my work as possible, and I get weekly emails that are automatically archived into a folder. But that's kind of where I start all of my literature searches. I just scroll through, I look through, and I just see what's being published out there. So that helps me stay on top of not just the traditional or classic research, that helps me stay on top of the cutting edge and things that are being published in real time. Because again, like, you don't want to look at the classic research, identify all of these research problems, and be overlooking all of this new scholarship that has addressed those problems. That's not a great feeling when you submit either a grant application or a journal article, and the response is, there's this there's this whole section of the literature that you were blind to. So that's kind of how I've helped myself stay on top and know what's going on. And again, it's kind of a low effort thing that I do, right? I mean, a lot of times I'm just drinking my morning coffee and scrolling through my journal table of contents updates to see what's out there.
that is really a great idea. I like that.
I'm curious, and I have to ask, because how much of a role do just informal talks, conversations, coffees, drinks with colleagues and friends in the field or practitioners. How much of a role has that played in you both of you guys' sort of a research process, especially with coming up with research questions? Because I mean, I may be overweighing this, but at least in my experience, come up with the best research, like super really interesting research questions, just having drinks with friends and just talking about specific issues in whether it be in policing or mass shootings or whatever it may be. So I'm curious as to how that has, if that has played a role for you guys too.
I mean, personally, when I'm having drinks, I think I'm a lot smarter and funnier than I am in reality. So like the next day, I realized most of the ideas I had maybe weren't worth pursuing. But more seriously, yeah, so like informal networks, that's how you learn about what other people are up to. So for example, one interest that one of my police agency partners has currently revolves around the use of drones as replacement for helicopters in their city to respond to traffic accidents, stuff like that. Not much written on that, but I know of other people who are in the middle of doing randomized experiments on that exact topic.
Mm.
So Joel, so to your point, by engaging these people informally and just maintaining a relationship with them, I get to learn about what research says about this topic before it's even completed and published. So there is like an informal network component to this for sure.
Yeah, I mean, my experience has definitely been similar to yours, Joel. There's definitely been proposals, research articles that I've published where the idea just came from an informal chat, coffee or drink, at a conference or, just talking with somebody. So definitely. Eric, I really thought it was a great observation that you made about subscribing to the table of contents. It's really brilliant. I would add that what I've done, which is similar, although I like your idea even better, is you can do the Google Scholar alerts also, right? Where you put the topic in, or you could even follow particular authors. And then anytime they publish either on the topic or the author publishes, you get an alert. So very similar to what you're doing. And I've done that, and I've definitely archived those as well. We are running a little bit close to the end, but I think we have time, Dr. Pizzo, for one last question. The person was very struck by the mail surveys, and they were just curious how the response rate was going for the mail surveys.
Yeah, so the mail surveys, and I should have showed a picture of the flyer. So there were 12 postal routes that we were interested in targeting. Everyone got pretty much the same flyer with a unique QR code and a URL so that we could keep track of the geography where the responses came in. We got a 5% response rate, which I thought was bad, but political science has used this method a lot. I'm not familiar with any criminologists who have prior used like the EDDM for survey research, and the political scientists have an average of about 2.5, 3% response rate. So getting 5% of responses is actually pretty good using this exact methodology. So we targeted 7,000 households. We got 5% response rate, and the responses have been super interesting. So for example, the citizens in the targeted areas ranked traffic safety as their #1 priority. The police department thought it was going to be something like violence, right? Because everyone's worried about violence. They thought it was going to be something like drug overdoses, since the opioid epidemic is such a contemporary concern. But it was overwhelmingly, when we looked at all the rankings, people were concerned about traffic safety. Which again, so now the police, they're now considering how they could deploy their officers in a way that's going to minimize the risk of traffic accidents, because they took the time to learn a little bit more about what the people in the city prioritize.
Oh, that is great. So we are getting close to the end. We just want to thank you, Dr. Pisa. Really excellent talk, and we're very grateful for you taking the time. We also
Thank
want
you
to
for having me. This was fun. This was legitimately fun. I have, very few actual hobbies, so I enjoyed this.
uh, it was fun for us as well, and we couldn't be more grateful. We also want to thank again NIJ for their support, which makes it possible. I just want to plug again, if you have a couple of minutes to please complete the post-event survey. Again, any feedback that you give, it allows us, very similar to Dr. Pease's survey with the police, to hopefully make adjustments to improve things in the future, which is always our goal. Our next session is going to be Wednesday, April 22nd. It's going to be the same time, 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we have two terrific guests, both from NIJ, Dr. Angela Moore and Ms. Christine Crossland, and they're going to be discussing how to draft effective proposal narratives, talking about how to build a compelling case for your project's needs, goals, and anticipated impact. So please do spread the word to your colleagues and networks. We want to thank everybody for taking the time to come to today's talk. We're very excited about the mission, and we're looking forward to the future speakers and events. Thanks, everybody, for coming today.